Thanks very much for everybody to join this session room here, where we are talking about digital innovation and how it transforms agriculture. And I'm very happy that I have three main speakers here today, which are giving impulses, and we then afterwards will start a discussion and try to identify how we transform agriculture based on digital innovation. For the discussion, I will repeat this later on again. For the discussion, I would like you to write your questions into the chat. It's much easier than when people speak up, so then I can just summarize the question and hand it over to the podium. Nevertheless, please you can also write questions into the chat during the presentations. And I would now like to ask Achim Walter to start. Just to introduce Achim shortly, Achim is, sorry, Achim again, a strange breed of a physicist and a biologist. That's a great basis for digital innovation in agriculture. Achim was working for quite a while in Heidelberg, then came here to Jülich, and now he's a professor at the ETH in Zurich. And I would now like to hand over to Achim for the presentation. You can share your screen.
Thanks a lot for the invitation and for the introduction. So my talk is entitled Digital Innovations for Sustainable Agriculture. And of course, if we talk about sustainability, you are all aware, and I don't need to rehearse the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that are the aim to which these innovations need to be aligned with. But the crucial questions I would like to call out are how can we sustainably feed the world in view of rising demography and spatial constraints? How can digitalization and technology help in this endeavor? And how to realize this in different agricultural systems and regions? And this has to be reached for all three dimensions of sustainability, for the social, economic, and environmental dimension. And of course, this is very important to me. The way how to reach this is difficult. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. In German, we have the word, not the word jack of all trades, but eierlegende Wollmilchsau. And these eierlegende Wollmilchsäue only exist maybe in the car industry, and I doubt that they really exist there. So whenever you deal with agriculture and more sustainable solutions, you will see that the situation is very complex, that you need different solutions for different aspects of any challenge that you're working on. And there are very intelligent papers that have been written on this, and solutions need to tackle very individual situations. Overall, most people I'm in contact with think about agriculture in terms of the industrialized agriculture in countries of Europe or the Americas. And if I want to come down from the jack of all trades picture into a bit more detail, then there are, of course, huge challenges, and solutions need to take into consideration how we can decrease or at least consolidate livestock production, how we come to a less intense, more diverse crop cultivation, and how we can impose a smart use and development of technology like biotechnology, but also the technologies that we are discussing today, digitalization, sensing, robotics, image processing. All of these approaches are required for agriculture to become more sustainable. And I would like to point out that we are only discussing a very small fraction of the possible ways to the solution. And this needs to be very coarse, of course. Also, another important point I would like to make in my introductory statement is that we have to be aware that we co-developed with our food. It took about 10,000 years, but only started about 10,000 years ago, that we domesticated certain plants and animals. And only since then we have the lifestyle, the differentiated societies, the high population densities that we see these days. And for most of these 10,000 years, there was only a very moderate development of technology. Until about 100 years ago, situations on the field still didn't look very different from the very early days. And only in the past 100 years, we have seen an explosive development of technology, breeding technology, and of human population density. You're all aware about this, but this is something that's very important to understand, that the crop systems that we developed, that we see on our fields today, only became so powerful and became capable to nurturing the large fraction of the human population that we see today by modern technologies, by breeding technologies, and by the intensity of measures that we do these days in agriculture. And I think the central challenge that we have to work on, if we want to speak about general terms, is that during the past 100 years, we have learned how to produce more as a human global society. And for the coming 100 years, we need to be ingenious to be more efficient. We need to learn how to produce more efficiently. I think if there is the need for a central dogma to be given in a short phrase, it is this dogma that we need to be more efficient with our systems. This holds true both for developing countries, for the global south, and for industrialized countries, although in the global south, the issue at hand is very, very different from the issue at hand in the countries where at least we speakers are living in. But also in the global south, the digitalization, the new technology that we see with the further development of computers, of machine learning technologies, of communication technologies, is finding its way and is improving situations. About 10 years ago, lots of research projects and lots of down-to-earth initiatives have been starting to use communication technology like cell phones, smartphones. Today, we see sharing economy, we see sharing services depending on rapid communication, like we know it in our countries from Uber taxis. You can order tractors there. Things like this are beginning to be used. And we are seeing first uses of drones, of sensor technology, also used in developing countries. So I'm convinced that the solutions that research is developing in industrialized countries these days will find a spillover also to developing countries. And these spillovers will happen in two different sets of technologies. That's what I would like to advertise. The first one is a very rapid approach with precision agriculture. Precision agriculture is based on the principles when, where, and how much input is needed. High-end technology is developed to make agriculture more efficient, to apply intelligently things only where they are needed. And the second very important thing is to improve crop breeding. This is a medium-term approach. This does not improve agriculture within the next months, but it is important to have germplasm of our most important crops and of new crops, of new crop systems that are coming up, like with mixtures or with niche crops that can play out the improvements of technology, be it CRISPR-Cas technologies or technologies that help to make these crops better. And this is already almost my last slide that summarizes the most important things I would like to say. We have a certain block of challenges like excessive use of pesticides, fertilizers, novel pests, climate change, soil compaction. And the way how we can tackle this with technology, image processing technology, artificial intelligence, and statistics, either in crop breeding or in precision agriculture, is that we have to evaluate pictures, that we have to better understand where to apply how much of a certain input on a field in a given situation. This can be done with more classical machinery. It can even be done by hand in settings of the global south, or it can be done with more automated, fancy machinery. There is a lot of research going on in this realm, and this research, and that's the last point I would like to make, needs to be transdisciplinary research. That means not only us researchers should come up with ideas how to develop intelligent solutions, but we need to do this in communication with the farmer, with the consumer, with the authorities that can put regulations into place. That's what I would like to give as an input to you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Karim, for this very great introduction to the overall field and the challenges and the needs which are there. We would, I think we go through the 3 impulse talks first. So we would then immediately switch over to Tony. I would like to introduce then Tony Bridmore. Tony, and that's a kind of red thread going through this session, is also not a learned agronomist. He's a computer scientist, and Tony is working very closely with biologists and agronomists. And he will talk about affordable in situ phenotyping of cassava roots with deep machine learning. Yes, thanks very much, Tony. We can see your slides. That's good.
I wanted to pick up on a couple of things that Achim said and focus on a particular example, I think. Uli says my background is in computer science, and particularly image analysis and machine learning. And I wanted to highlight the possibilities for using these sorts of technologies in smaller farming situations in developing countries, rather than just in the larger mechanized farming systems that we see in the Northern Hemisphere. And give you an example of one of the projects that we've been working on as to show you what can be done. So you might have seen the editorial in Nature recently talking about an increased focus being needed for smallholding farmers, and we've been working with CIAT in Colombia to try to address one of these problems. So we've been looking at cassava roots. It's a difficult problem for agriculture in that the cassava root has a very long and variable growth cycle. So it can take anything from 8 months to 12, 13 months for a cassava root to become food, to bulk up and change from the fibrous yellowy sorts of roots that you see in the picture to the thick red ones that gradually grow and become food. And this makes it very difficult for the small farmers. If it takes longer for their crop to mature than a single rainy season, then they lose a huge amount of their production. And the variation in it prevents any sort of industrial scale cassava production. So this is a food that feeds more than 10% of the world's population, but it's still grown in small farms, often by single people and small families. So the biological challenge is to find strains, to find cultivars that will bulk up early and reliably within a rainy season. And to do that, they need to have the computational digital tools to provide the information they need so they can identify those things. So the challenge that we had was to produce phenotyping tools that could be applied where cassava is grown. So the first thing we did was we built a low-cost phenotyping environment. This is an aeroponic system made of very cheap materials, costs virtually nothing, and can be put together all around the world. It's been trialed already in South America and Africa, I believe. And it will allow people, scientists in these countries, to produce cassava roots and take images of cassava roots in a sensible, affordable way. What really interests me, though, is the idea of how we process these images once we've got them. So we take a machine learning approach, like many people now. And in that approach, the standard workflow is capture an image data set, annotate it. So you're telling the system what it is you want to extract from the image. You may be drawing in red over the wheat ears in that picture. You then design your neural net architecture, which is the hard part. Train the network up with the test data you've gathered, the annotated data you've got, test it and deploy it. And if you're looking at things like cassava farms in South America and so on, the deployment isn't easy. You don't necessarily have the high performance computing technologies that we have in the West. Okay. So to run through what we did, we with CIAT gathered some images. Yeah, we gathered around 500 images in their facility in Colombia. And they annotated them, which basically means they took the images in the top of this row of pictures and they colored in by hand the roots that we were interested in. Okay? Obviously something that takes some time. We provided them with some very low cost, simple software tools to help with that. And they still couldn't do very many. So they did about 500 images. Okay? We then designed our network architecture. So the goal we were aiming for here was to be able to do first fairly simple phenotyping and just count the number of storage roots in each image. So we took the image on the left and designed a neural network architecture that we could put the image in and have a count come out the other end. what we discovered was that there's quite a lot of variation in the way that these routes appear as they age. And we struggled to get a single network to do the whole job. So what we did was we designed an age prediction network that would decide whether this was a young route or an old route, and then we put those through 2 separate paths, so you can see here. Yeah? So we have 2 different sorts of networks. 2 of them are different, 2 of them are the same, yeah, and are trained on different ways of doing it. We still decided that we needed more data. Yeah, we were trying to do a counting task, so we wanted to put the image in and get a number out. So we needed training data that had every possible counting result in. We couldn't find those in the images; they just happened not always to appear. So we automatically generated some. We used a thing called a GAN, a generalized adversarial network, which will generate images, yeah, from test data. So with this, you basically show it some real images and it learns a mapping from an initial data set to a real image, a fake image. Yeah? So we showed it our route segmentations that we'd obtained from a set of real cassava images, and we got it to learn a mapping between those 2 things so that we can now put our image in, we can generate a fake image from it, yeah? And then the second part of the network tries to get this to, tries to figure out when we're faking it. Yeah? So one branch generates fake images, the other branch tries to tell whether it's a fake or not, and they learn together, fight each other, and you end up with a system that's really good at generating images. So these are some of the images that we created, and hopefully look fairly realistic. The networks work fairly well. Yeah, we can tell young routes from old routes fairly well. Sometimes it thinks old routes are young, but not very often. And we managed to get counting accurate to 71% with young and 86% with old. Yeah, and this is now being tested in field trials out in Colombia. So we could do this, okay, to a certain extent in an early part of the project. We wanted to make it affordable though, by which we mean we wanted it to run on very low cost computing devices. And we took an approach known as separable convolutions. So these neural networks are taking little pieces of image, little arrays of image, and processing them. And they do this a lot, many of these array operations. If you take a square picture that's 5 by 5, you've got 25 bits of data you're working with, 25 multiplications every time you apply it, and that can blow up and become a huge number. Separable convolutions are a way of splitting this up and doing the same operation in 2 one-dimensional convolutions. And we built our networks so that they would only learn those. And we tested it on a variety of different data sets, and we got it running on an old Samsung mobile in a few seconds. So basically what this is an example, I hope, that it is possible to run the sorts of machine learning techniques that people get very excited about now on low-cost devices in countries that are less technologically developed, perhaps, than the areas that are developing the methods. Okay? So you can take these modern deep learning methods and you can use comparatively few annotated training images because you can generate others using the same sort of technology. You can use things like separable convolutions. There are other methods as well to simplify the processing needed and to get these things onto low-powered computing hardware. And we hope when the trials are completed, we'll be able to provide better evidence that they can support research and breeding programs in these countries. And if we can do that, what we can do then, hopefully, is to make life a lot easier for the smallholder cassava farmers and give them some greater stability and hopefully get them into new food production processes. And I couldn't resist showing the last picture. This is what we're working on now as part of the same project. Instead of counting the objects, we want to pull out their 3-dimensional structure from a single image. And we didn't have any cassava roots, but we have managed to do it on that banana. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tony, for giving that example, how digital innovation has also focused on countries which are less highly equipped with technology. We will then move on to Jennifer. Let me just shortly also introduce Jennifer. Jennifer is bringing another dimension of digitalization for the big data aspect, statistical background. And she will give her perspective from the US perspective on digitalization in US agriculture. Jennifer, it's on, it's working.
Thank you, everyone. So I would like to bring in a perspective from the US, and I appreciate both Occam and Tony's comments. I'll try to refer to them as I'm speaking. So the issue in the US is that US farm sizes are continuing to increase, which means we have more acres to manage with less available labor. So if we want to emphasize sustainability and resiliency, our farming community is very, very interested in those areas. So we don't have to convince them it's important. We have to work on providing them the information that they can use to drive their management decisions. So what we've been focusing on are cloud-based, data-driven decision support systems, as well as automated solutions. We see that as critical to the future of agricultural production. As you can see in this graphic, nearly every aspect of the cropping system today can be digitized. So that goes from planning, pre-planning, in-season processes, managing irrigation, fertilization, planting, harvesting, spraying applications, all the way to tillage and then the spring cycle. So we have this very complex decision cycle that farmers are facing every growing season. And fortunately, with the adoption of digitization and automation, we can collect more data and try to find the value in that data for the farming community. So here's an example of some of the work is there. We've developed an automated system for decision support in nitrogen application using center pivots. So if you're not familiar with the center pivot, it's basically a circular irrigation system. And so we have nitrogen that can be injected at various pivot points. And this is all monitored with computational systems so that we can get as long as monitoring how much nitrogen is applied. We can also process the data that's coming back from the cropping system, process the impact on the field, measure the amount of nitrogen that's been applied, and then make recommendations in the future. So this has potential environmental benefits. As Akka mentioned in one of his slides, there are ongoing discussions in the US about the application of fertilizer and impact on water systems. And so the smart management of applications of nitrogen is of critical importance. What I wanted to highlight here was that partnerships between industry and public entities are very critical to the transition of innovative methods to practice. As Akka mentioned, that the farming community is heavily tied in with industrial processes and industry, and that is also tied into policy decisions about farm management on a broader scale. So those partners all have to work together to make these kind of systems work. So I wanted to highlight the importance of plant phenomics in these systems. So for those of you not familiar with phenomics, it's the collection of measurable plant traits, whether visible to the eye or invisible. As someone with a statistician background, measurable is key to me. If we're not measuring, I'm not analyzing. So I like the idea of measurement. And the phenomics enables the full utilization of a lot of the research that's been done in genomics. So I was really looking at the connection between genotype and phenotype, aimed at addressing critical social needs, whether it's global food security, environmental sustainability, or the shortage in our agricultural labor forces. So our goal is to stimulate advances in agricultural technologies and also emerging data science, as Tony talked about, by collecting measurable traits and then working backwards to try to figure out how those traits have come to be and which ones are economically and agriculturally important. So we use plant phenomics to connect foundational plant sciences with agricultural practices. So coming from a university environment and also working with industry partners, we see the importance of foundational discoveries and our role is mainly to work to translate those into practice. And that drives a lot of the technological innovation in the US ag system. So you can see here, we have foundational science, we have applied research. We try to connect those through the data systems and through genotyping, phenotyping. And that also drives innovations in our agricultural technologies. What do we need to measure? When do we need to measure it? And how does that play a role in decision support systems? So I wanted to show you the phenotyper's pyramid. This is thanks to one of my colleagues, which is these layers of information that it's research and breeding, it's plant populations, doing experimentation and trials, collecting the data, which is where a lot of the phenotyping systems come in, whether you're working in industrial ag settings or smallholder farms. It's quantitative measurement, linking phenotype to genotype, and enabling decisions. And you can see on this pyramid that, as Aka mentioned, this requires expertise from many different disciplines working together in a team interdisciplinary approach. So the challenge in some sense to the research community and the practicing community is that we have to learn to talk to each other across disciplines and backgrounds to make these systems work. So I wanted to highlight one more example, which is a digital solution for nitrogen that involves phenotyping in the field. So farmers are always looking at choices where you have to optimize cost and benefits. They want solutions that are economical so that they can be adopted and that are fast turnaround so they get the information they need to make decisions in a timely fashion. So the purpose of this project was increase farmer profitability, decrease the energy use by optimizing nitrogen application, and reduce the environmental footprint for agriculture. So this is involving nitrogen stock sensors in the field associated with variable nitrogen rate maize trials in Nebraska. So those of you not familiar with US geography, Nebraska is right in the center. And most of the state, as most of the Midwest, is agriculturally focused. So this is a maize trial in Nebraska, bringing together engineers from Iowa, which is one of our neighboring states, also very agriculturally focused, with Nebraska agronomists and plant breeders to measure nitrogen in the field, how much is being applied, how much is being taken up by the plants, so we can associate application with use by plants and optimize fertilization use. So one last thing I wanted to mention was we have a project that's funded by the United States Department of Agriculture. It is intended to bring together the crop and livestock communities around genome to phenome, so connecting genotyping to phenotyping. One of the challenges we have in the US is that the crop and livestock communities are relatively siloed, and they speak among themselves, but they don't necessarily speak to each other. And they're facing similar challenges in linking genotype to phenotype. So the idea was to develop a shared vision in this space, identify research needs, opportunities, gaps in methods and technologies by working with not only academic partners, but also industry partners, nonprofits, and global organizations. And we have a method to fund seed projects in this space to enable researchers and industry partners to scope out parts of the space where we need to identify and face challenges. And we're going to communicate and disseminate all of the findings. So this is a open project in the sense that anyone can join. And it has an emphasis on communication as well as training. So workshops and webinars and publications. So as I said, anyone can join. This project just started a few months ago. So we're in the very early planning stages. And we are emphasizing in partnership with the USDA, our partner organizations and global engagement and stakeholder organizations. So if this is a space in which you're interested, I encourage you to go to the webpage. You can sign up for our listserv, and we will share with you the activities that are related to this project. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for giving that perspective from the US and also the openness for the open projects, which I think is very important. And we will probably come back to that question of how to interact between different parts of the community later on. So before we go into the discussion between us and also with the groups, with the audience, which is actually increasing more and more, which is good. Please, audience, if you want to ask a question, just put it into the chat. I will then summarize the questions and put them to the speakers, and we can also discuss this in a more broader sense. So please put it into the chat if you have a question there. We already have some questions, which we could probably start with. So there was one question actually from Jennifer to Achim, where she asked, could you expand on the role of niche crops in the future for digital agriculture? Would you like to comment on that, Achim?
Sure, I'm happy to do so. The entire field about which we talked right now is very much focused on major crops because these are the crops where we can get research money for. So it's a bit difficult if you want to come up with any project on a strange small niche crop. Nevertheless, these niche crops are very important because they often have less pests and diseases, and they are the ones with which you can catch the heart of the consumer, because there are always a lot of people who would like to drive a change in agronomy and who are willing to spend more money from their private budget on such niche crops. And you also find farmers who want to push certain crops. And therefore, I think it would be great if we as researchers could also have an eye on developments from our world that can foster the further productivity and the further acceptance of these niche crops. For example, Tony showed a concrete example about how you can investigate root systems in crops. This is something that is applicable probably to a lot of crops. And if we can help pushing a niche crop that would be interesting for nutrition in certain regions, then I think this would be helpful, although we could not publish very highly on it. But I think it's our obligation to not forget these crops and to work along with consumer organizations on such crops. I hope that this answered your question and that this was somehow substantiated for you.
So probably short additional question on that. So niche crops, it's probably not niche crops, but if you look into horticulture is highly technicized already today. Mm-hmm. So how would you see the differences there or the opportunities which can be used with horticulture in that context?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. In horticulture, you have a wider variety of crops, and you have a high value of these crops. So very early on, if you're marketing salad or peppers or whatever, you have a higher value for the individual crop. And if you do management of that crop in the field, the costs for a robot doing mechanical weeding instead of spraying will pay off. And therefore, lots of the developments that we see in automation are are especially progressive in horticultural crops. When it comes, for example, to mechanical weeding or to automated harvesting, these are things you see in apple, you see in salads, in kind of expensive vegetables where you can get around to a certain degree on the pesticides that have been used conventionally over decades.
Okay, thanks very much. There is a whole cluster of questions about barriers. We talked about you talked in your impulses a lot about technology. There might be barriers to address or take over that technology in the more industrialized countries. There are probably other barriers in less industrialized countries. So would you probably also as a group like to a little bit discuss about what the barriers are there to bring these novel technologies into practice? So probably Tony, would you like to start on it? What's your main topic there?
So I think for the sort of things that I was talking about, there are technological barriers. Jennifer put a question in about edge computing and delivering our sort of machine learning stuff through that. I think the problem is with a lot of the places we were looking at, they were a long way from the edge of a network, right? And the idea that you could work to a server was still rather difficult. So you have to get it to work on a local device. So that's one technological thing that's being addressed. Oddly, what seems to be happening is that it's being addressed by people who have very specialized, large-scale things that generate huge images. So if you have an X-ray machine or a laser ablation tomography system working in your lab, it produces monster images that you can't possibly put onto a machine. So you have to find onto a normal computer. So you have to find a way of making it lightweight. And in doing that, you find the technologies that you need to be able to do the cassava thing on a mobile phone, because it's the same kind of problem. So there are technical problems. I think there's around machine learning at the moment, there's a kind of a cultural problem. I think we need to convince people that it's not magic, right? It's just different to what happened before. And it's a strength and a weakness, really. If you're developing these sorts of machine learning things, it needs a different engagement between the computer scientists and the plant crop scientists, the users of the system. A few years ago, it was quite common for people to come to my lab and say, can you write a piece of software that will do this? Right? And give us a specification for a piece of software. And then we would find a solution and send it back to them. Yeah? With machine learning, we're still having to find a technical solution by designing a network and so on. But there's a closer interaction between the computer scientists now and the plant people, in that the annotation of the data needs to be done by someone who knows what they're doing. And it's often not done as a one-shot thing. So we're finding now we're getting into a dialogue with the biologists where we're showing them how it works and saying, okay, give us some more examples then, right? And the conversation, nature of the conversation has changed. So there's some technical stuff. There's also some kind of cultural things around expectations and the way people interact with other disciplines.
So this is probably about communication between computer scientists and biologists, scientists. So how to actually get these digital technologies out to farmers or to breeders. That's probably another step of cultural difference which has to be overcome. Anyone to comment on that?
I think so, yeah. I think the breeders in the UK at least need to be convinced that it's worthwhile for them to do. Yeah? Because there's lots of things that can be done, yeah, but you've got to make it economically viable and you've got to sell it to them. So we have a system running now with Syngenta, which is kind of related to the cassava stuff, I guess, in that Syngenta employees are taking images out in the fields of things like sunflowers and uploading the images to our server. And we are counting the number of seeds on the sunflower head and sending the number back. Okay? Syngenta know it's worth their while because they understand the technology. Convincing a farmer that it's worth his or her while to do this is difficult, I think. Yeah. So, yeah, I think there's some convincing to do.
Yeah, I would add to what Tony is saying that one of the approaches that we've used for reaching out and engaging farmers is kind of twofold. One is we engage with farmers that are connected already with the university system. So we know that they're at the edge and they're interested in trying new things. They're running test farms, essentially. We use them as kind of a beta testers for new stuff. At the same time, we engage with our commodity boards. So this goes back to what Achim was talking about, how we focus on major agricultural crops. That's because that's where the money is. So we talk with our soybean commodity board, our corn commodity board, wheat commodity, and engage those boards and explain to them what we're trying to do and use them as sort of an intro, an entree into those farming communities. So we host joint events where members of commodity boards come and join us, represent farmer associations, and explain to their members sort of what we are trying to do. And then that starts sort of the communication between the research community and the farming community by using these commodity boards as kind of a bridge.
Okay, before I would ask Achim about that dimension, how this probably would act, because what Tony and Jennifer just described is probably more in the industrialized countries. So how do we actually get technology over in less industrialized countries and less industrialized farmers? That might be a different challenge. So I'll give you some second to think about this, Achim. Before, I would like to just ask the audience, if you have more questions, just put them into the chat. We can then summarize them. I see some more of them, but there might be more coming in. So Achim, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, sure. A lot of my colleagues here at ETH Zurich are only doing their research in agricultural settings of the global south. And what they report is that it is very important to be on the farm with the farmers, to initiate transdisciplinary projects from the beginning on. So to live with the farmers, to listen to the farmers, also to bring students to the farmers. We have one class where students are traveling or have been traveling before Corona times to Ethiopia and to Kenya, and have been interacting with the local people, understood their needs, understood the soils that they have, understood the cultural issues that they have with often being either a crop farmer or being a herdsman. And things like that need to be understood before you can start developing solutions, before you can start really targeting issues that are at hand in these countries. I saw in the chat that someone asked for how to reduce food waste. The issue is completely different in our countries and in those countries. There's food waste everywhere, but food waste in our countries means, as a consumer, having filled up your fridge too largely, and in developing countries, it means that you don't have a transport chain, and that you are not very well aligned with the market and how to deliver things. And in these issues, also in developing countries, communication can help a lot. So setting up systems that help farmers to do to set up networks on their own. This is something that has been very efficient in several countries. I mentioned very briefly this Uber-like project that helps farmers to get to a tractor when they need one by simply posting a message that they would be willing to spend some money on a tractor today or tomorrow, and the ones who possess tractors can give their offers in these networks. So you really need to be down to earth and be together with the consumers, with the citizens with whom you want to interact. And that's the last buzzword I would like to give here. And also Tony has been involved early on in citizen science projects. So the way to reach out with our technology, with machine learning things, is to, for example, pose challenges like data annotation challenges, challenges that take a look into which level of biodiversity do we still find on fields, by simply letting the ordinary citizens who are interested about that roam around with their eyes or with their smartphone cameras, take pictures of situations, if that is allowed, if the farmer lets them take pictures on their fields, and evaluate situations, rate situations, and help with annotation of pictures like all of us do when we are solving one of these challenges before we can place an order, whether this is a chair or whether we see a car here. By this, we are helping industry to get better machine learning algorithms for detecting cars or detecting chairs in situations. And similar things, similar processes need to be set up for agriculture and food production, where the interested people can help refining machine learning methods, and then also situations for niche products, and in countries that that do not have an industrialized agriculture can improve. That's the way how our methods can diffuse also in countries where the agricultural system is much poorer and where completely different challenges are at hand.
There's a probably rather common than an answer than a question from Clara, where she says, unfortunately, ITC infrastructure and literacy among farmers in developing countries could be very limited. I think that's definitely a limitation, which already has been addressed here before as well. On the other hand, we have our own experience here that, for example, with respect to smartphone availability, that's a very available source and instrument in the global south, the less industrialized countries. And if you look at the compute power which is in the smartphone today, this is enormous. And if we can use that and utilize that, we can have a lot of opportunities there in bringing ITC infrastructure directly, because they have the infrastructure for that. And I think that's a good opportunity which is there. There's another question there. Could you provide examples on how digital innovation is helping to save local varieties, agrodiversity, and increasing climate resistance? Do you think that a public investment is enough for this kind of research and extension? Anyone want to comment on that one?
Well, my research is taking place mostly in industrialized regions. So I'm not the expert on the funding situation of research in the global south, but from what I can observe, it is possible. We have a huge project at ETH Zurich funding research activities for transdisciplinary projects in the global south. We have had a lot of research going on for decades with professors, with scientific groups interacting in the global south. It's just that the problem is so complex, because if you want to increase biodiversity with any given crop, you need to be specified on the crop. You often need to specify the solution for a given subregion. So therefore, the successes are not as easily visible as they would be if you work together with one of the big agtech giants, where you have a huge impact very rapidly. That's why in the press and for lots of the grants that we are competing for, these industrialized settings are more prominent. But I know of very many colleagues who do this research with local variety improvements in countries of the global south. But this is groundwork that needs a while to take off. You will not find a silver bullet in one crop in one specific region and being able to expand that to a lot of different situations. But you really need to do a lot of work with individual farmers, farming organizations, countries.
Okay, thanks very much. I just would like to pose a last question, because then we have to go back to the plenary. We mostly talked now about the digital innovation in the primary production sector. But if we look at also the resource use efficiency or the crop use efficiency, which was also mentioned in one of the questions, this is not only the primary production, this is the entire chain. And there was already a mention of the waste. But do you have examples where we use digital technology beyond primary production, so to couple within the chain or to address the avoidance of food waste in the later parts of the chain? Does anyone want to comment on that one?
So it's kind of not my thing, but I have seen examples of people trying to use machine learning to predict what will happen further down the chain so that they can plan for it. But I think that's probably been going on for a long time with different technologies.
I do know of some projects. I've been involved in some, particularly in the dairy industry, with milk production and doing modeling from a risk analysis perspective to try to predict spoilage conditions for milk, so that this is after collection, but prior to distribution, working with milk facilities to try to reduce spoilage. I'm also aware of, since my home department is food science, we also have projects working in raspberries in South America, where post harvesting, doing careful screening and checking conditions to try to avoid bacterial spoilage prior to packaging and shipping. And that can involve sensors, disposable sensors. That can involve more sophisticated screening and sampling processes to try to do early detection. And that involves the digital side. From the data collection side, you can use imaging in those systems to try to image for early infections, early spoilage. And then also you have to use technologies then to do backtracking and back sourcing. So if berries are arriving and seem to be particularly prone to spoilage, then you can do tracing back through the transportation system to find out the potential source of that contamination.
Mm-hmm. Distribution networks, like Jennifer just described, are very important. There are lots of startups these days who work based on that technology. And one example I would like to make is that in food industry, there is a lot of development around so-called digital twins. These are simulations of fruits, for example, that are shipped from over the ocean. And by having a lot of measurements from sensor networks, you can better understand how these fruits ripen and develop during the time when they are shipped. And so you can optimize these processes based on a lot of modeling results and based on sensor technology that you place in one of these cardboard packages where your bananas are shipped with for weeks over the ocean. And these digital twin solutions are, to my mind, the best use of a lot of the modern computing power to improve processes also in food technology. But there is a lot to improve still, as I said, startup companies. So one of these barriers is also that more startup companies should be funded in that realm. Not more of the same with the big players, but be innovative, start doing citizen science projects and involving with startup projects. They come from the base. They are transdisciplinary in their own realm.
Okay, thanks very much for all this great information. If there are no further questions, I would now like to thank again the speakers and for the very lively discussion, for the great input which you gave. We will now have to summarize things and bring it back to the plenary. And as I saw just with the left eye, the plenary room is filling slowly. So they want us to meet there again at 5:10 German time. In roughly 5 minutes. So if you want to go back there, please be welcome. And then there will be a summary of the breakout sessions there. Thanks very much again, and see you there, and stay healthy and safe. Thanks very much for everybody.
In this final session, we want actually to bring the insights of the different streams here together and discuss it jointly. And if it works, in the end, we may even have a quick voting on some issues. Let's see whether that works. But right now, we would like to invite session leaders to share in minutes your most important insights and findings with us. And first, as first speaker, I would like to invite the breakout room number 1. So that was the Phenorob group that was dealing with digital innovations. So I'm not entirely sure whether it will be Ulrich, Roland, or Oliver who is giving us a brief presentation of what was discussed in the room on digital innovation. The floor is open. It's Ulrich. Ulrich, please go ahead. We look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, so hello. I will not put up a slide now, but I just report shortly what we did and what kind of main outcomes are. I think the expected outcome was that we have a lot of new technologies, specifically in digitalization, which deliver new data and which deliver a new understanding on the crops, but also on the environment, and which have the potential to revolutionize agriculture. At the same time, we see a lot of options there. While we see a lot of options, we still see a lot of a long way to go in many cases. There is a gap between industry and academia. There's a need to come from a prototype to robust products. There are also a lot of cultural differences between users and developers, between science, breeders, farmers. There's many differences there between high-tech and low-tech applications. We also see the need of kind of sharing information on the one hand, as well as infrastructure between communities which work in different directions, and they all provide different opportunities. So that's on the one hand, the mega crops, so the large ones which are which have a lot of support anyway, but as well there's the niche crops, so there's horticultural crops which have a potential already existing high-tech and digitalization opportunities there. And therefore, networks which are linking the different communities across different backgrounds are very important. There are good infrastructure networks in which mostly are at the moment on continental level, but also on country level. They need to be integrated. One point which we also put into the context there was that it's primary production, which has a lot of opportunities there, but also the link from primary production to the whole chain or the whole network of utilization in the food and non-food system can take a lot of digital solutions. We have also collected a number of examples there. Altogether, for the translation of the opportunities into the practical realm, we require to have a better communication between those who can provide the digital solutions and those who need it, or who probably potentially even don't see that they need them today or that they can use them today. So the level of integration and discussion about what is possible and what is needed, the possibility and the demand is still something where we have to increase the dialogue in order to make things happen. I think that was the main summary of the points which we had in both sessions this morning and this afternoon.
Well, thank you so much, Ulrich. I think a very important point. So please note them for the discussion. We do have time for discussion. You can actually use the chat function also to already put in questions there. So I would now like to invite a representative of the AIT group who was actually working on the microbiome, the rapporteur from breakout group number 2. I would be very happy if Tanya is already here. So Tanya, please go ahead, Tanya Kostik, the rapporteur of the AIT group, kindly share with us what was presented in breakout group number 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina. So we have we had quite a lively discussion in the morning and now in the afternoon about the microbiomes and their potential. And there were some really sort of key messages that I pulled out. So first of all, it was a general agreement that we really need to take a holistic approach. And it was on so many levels, on level of considering microbiome as much more than bacteria, as it is now quite often considered in science, but also to see the humans, the animals and plants as a holobiont system, then also to consider the whole interconnectedness within the food system, and that we need to develop better understanding of how different elements and their microbiomes affect each other. But also interesting, it was addressed, especially in the morning session, this holistic approach that we really need to achieve an international R&D perspective, and that all would profit through enabling of other regions. I mean, Africa was mentioned among others, anticipate this microbiome trend that we are now experiencing. And then we also discussed, and I think that this connects really good to what we heard now from the first session, how the interlinkage of different, let's call them new technologies like artificial intelligence, the digitalization, the robotics and sensory technologies, together with everything we now have in the microbiome R&D, is expected to push this field further forward. We are also discussing of how important expectation management is, how there is this high promise that microbiomes could deliver, but how to manage these expectations. And we agreed, or agreement was, that it's really important to link different stakeholders from science through industry and also the policy makers, but also to make sure to educate all groups and to sort of achieve a certain general level of knowledge and understanding. And we had really now an interesting afternoon session that focused mostly on the regulatory challenge, and we understood that we recognize how difficult that is, and that we have different regulations in different regions, and that many of them are based on what was before and are not so suitable for these complex systems that we have now. And again, we believe, or there was a common understanding, that we need a better understanding between the science and regulatory experts, that we need better exchange and better dialogue, and that we need to develop the things together in order to set up the system that's really adapt to deal with this new and complex microbiome-based application. And having said all of these key messages, I mean, I would also like just to finish with a quote of one of our speakers in the morning of pricing, and I found it really great. He said, what we actually is a long-term vision rather than a short-term outcomes.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for sharing this perspective, your insights. It looks you had really exciting discussions covering a wide variety of aspects, and we will definitely also take it up in the discussion. And I would like to again really encourage our members here who join this session. We have 93 members. Please anytime put a question into the chat. So thanks again to Tanya, rapporteur from the AIT group who works on the microbiome. And now I would like to invite Monica's group and Philip's group from the IGZ, from the Agricultural Systems for the Future. I see Philip is here to report. Philip Albers, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Regina. So in our workshop, we really presented and discussed different research approaches and innovation approaches, and highlighted some of the barriers and incentives that are really important to manage this whole transformation in agriculture. So at the end of our two workshop sessions, we asked our speakers to summarize the most important aspects in a short closing statement. And what you see here in front of you are the closing statements that I would like to share with you. So we absolutely agreed that future agricultural systems need to integrate biodiversity and resource efficiency into any decision making, and to be able to do so, Sonoko, Bellingrad, Kimura from our first session this morning summarized, we really need to make use of digital and non-digital tools for the valorization of non-commodity outputs, such as especially as ecosystem services. So, and to achieve that and to shift from homogeneous to diverse farming systems, Christine Watson from Scotland's Rural University College stated this morning that we we need to foster creativity. Creativity to encourage co-design of more diverse food and farming systems for, in the end, really sustainable future. And just from the last session, Christian Huyck, who's Scientific Director Agriculture at INRAE, summarized it like that. So we need to get out of the strong lock-in situation on the food and agri system and seek for place-based agroecology transitions, for example, with living labs for new social contracts on agri-food. So, but of course, we also need to seek for political and social acceptance and to foster this transformation. And something that's also very important are precisely formulated goals, and in the end also stakeholders that commit themselves to these goals, as Johannes Eselstein stated from the University of Göttingen. So Edeltraud Günther, who we invited from the United Nations University Flores, summarized it in a way that we need to calculate the costs of agricultural systems. New business models can be effectively stimulated as a result of including the external cost of agricultural systems in decision-making and drawing attention to the cost of waste. So in the end, I think this is something we all have to basically accept, that however urgent the need for transformation is, the need to transform our agri-systems, we simply cannot force people to be good, as Tilman Brück stated. We need to explain, we need to convince, and we need everyone at the end on our side. And Sandra Schwindenhammer, who's a political scientist from the University of Göttingen, then put it also in a nutshell. So she stated that we need to understand that in the enduring success of agricultural transformation is in the end inextricably linked to democracy and the fair, equal, inclusive, and transparent representation of societal concerns. So I think these in briefs were one of the main aspects that have been stated in our workshop. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Philip, for sharing this very interesting thoughts you had in your workshop. And I think it's very nicely put in these quotes from your panelists. So thanks a lot. And I'm sure that will also be food for further discussion in this plenary workshop session. So thanks a lot, Philip. That was great. And I would now like to invite a representative, I believe it's actually Max, from the Biomonitor group, who had the parallel session number 4 in the morning. I hope that Max is here, or if not, Justus here and can share. Oh, Max is here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Great.
And the organizers could stop the screen sharing of the previous slide, please. That would be very nice.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to do it without the slides. And we had a very interesting workshop this morning. And we were looking at how we can learn from success stories in implementation of bioeconomy strategies. And we also were looking for challenges in implementation. And another guidance was what's the role of the private sector. And we had actually very practical examples. We had 4 different speakers. The first one was Teresia Ronzo, who talked about more general the bioeconomy in Europe, and that, for example, the political recognition in Europe is very high, with a lot of bioeconomy strategies implemented in many countries. And then one of the very practical examples was a hemp farm in Germany, which was a success story by Raphael Dollon. And furthermore, we also had an example from Argentina, where a project was done on cyanophycin from tobacco. This was presented by Inge Buhr. And lastly, we had an example from Mats Asperm, who was presenting his work on plantation forestry in Africa, which you mentioned that this is a way more effective way to fight climate change than stopping deforestation is to instead do reforestation. And here also the private sector played a very important role. So the outcome of this workshop, summed up in some key messages, is that there's not an easy that is not easy to assess the contribution of the private sector. For example, because private investments are often not disclosed, but that doesn't mean that there are not many success stories. So we had several examples of these success stories in our session, which was hemp in Germany, the Sinophycin enriched tobacco plant in Argentina, or the afforestation in Africa. And however, the involvement of private companies often depends on policies and regulations. If the product approval costs are too costly, they can prevent investment by private companies. Furthermore, often a problem for private companies is to scale up new and innovative products due to high sunk costs. We had the example of the tobacco plants, where Inge Buhr mentioned that to scale, that they had a very successful field trial, but to scale up the production of this, they would need more financial support. And lastly, we have the message that the private sector can be more flexible than the public sector, while it needs to be held accountable, of course, and it can thrive very well on local expertise and have a large positive regional impact. Yeah, I think that was our key messages from our workshop.
Thank you so much, Maximilian, for sharing these insights of very interesting examples, yeah, from growing hemp to the plant crops in Tanzania, and the tobacco example, and also for reflecting on the obstacles that the private sector may face in implementing such interesting, innovative projects. I think that is also food for discussion. So thank you very much, Max, for sharing that. As the final feedback speaker, I would like to invite Carl Prey, the president of the ACABR, to report on the afternoon session in breakout room number 4, which was dealing with opportunities and challenges, what type of policies and regulations will foster the bioeconomy. Carl, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Regina. Our session, while it says policy and regulations and things like that, what we ended up talking a lot about was public sector research and both the kinds of structures that are the basis for bioeconomy innovation, and those being, well, in the United States, David Zilberman likes to call them the industrial education complex, or educational industrial complex, that is strongly linking the public and private sector together in developing, well, first basic research and then translational research, working with the private sector often, and then ultimately moving into the companies and implementation. So the kind of policy points that came out of the discussions about the public sector, I mean public and private sector there, were that you need to have incentives for both the public and private sector to work together and to develop new technology, and you need to you need to also be trying to reduce barriers to trade in technology and technology inputs, but also more research collaboration, which is of course speaking from the United States standpoint, we really haven't been encouraging lately, which I think is the wrong direction to go. Then David's idea is really for the spread of university research and the importance of basic research and university research in developing countries also was emphasized, and that the capacity for research, or sorry, the capacity that the CGIAR research international institutes have is something that could be used more effectively, perhaps to work with and help develop universities that are doing strong research in many developing countries. And then finally, his point, which was echoed by Maha Arujanan, is that unnecessary regulations can really hang up the process, reducing incentives to do research, but also reducing the amount of new innovation that comes out, not just for agriculture, but for bioindustry and other components of the bioeconomy. Ruben Echeverria then built on that and focused on the global South, with the emphasizing that there is, other than research in China and India and Brazil, the global South has very, very little research that's done by the public sector, and that this huge gap is a serious problem. And it's probably going to get worse because of the expenditures that governments are going to have to, or are making now in health issues on the COVID-19 epidemic. And so this is something that is going to force these countries and in the US and elsewhere too, to really look at its research portfolio and try to start making some serious changes and shake up the system, in a sense, in two ways. One way in which that, so that they can develop more sources of funding, organizations that are interested in not just agricultural production, but in other issues where the public sector and public agriculture research system can be effective in meeting society's needs, and just to increase the efficiency of the public sector research. And there needs to be some serious planning done, as sort of his point. The research agenda needs to make use of genomics and bio inputs, low carbon food systems, and biomass, et cetera. By focusing on some of these bioeconomy type issues, this can help the public research system both become more productive and also to reduce and also to find more supporters for the research system. And again, Ruben emphasized the importance of public and private partnerships that work together to increase the innovation system, and particularly working with organizations like the international centers and universities, working more with private companies, particularly local, small, medium-sized enterprises that can really be effective in accelerating the growth of the bioeconomy. Our final speaker, Dr. Arujanan, emphasized that the issue of science-based regulations that are needed at various levels to both encourage research and also to allow payoffs to farmers from research if it is regulated in an effective way and in a science-based manner, and that this kind of emphasis on implementation of policies that are actually on the law but are not implemented in a science-based manner, or that the policies themselves are not really based on science, was one of her major points. And I think those are the main points. Regina, did you want to add anything onto that, since you were there also?
Thank you, Carl. I think that was a very comprehensive and very good reflection of what was discussed and presented in this number 4 in the afternoon. So thanks a lot, Carl, for sharing that. And now we do have 25 minutes left, and we will first do a general discussion, and then we will try, if it works, some voting on some issues that have been discussed So I would like now to invite all of you, we still have 88 participants here, to actually ask questions or make comments. So you can just put them into the chat. Maybe you can let us know who you are directing your question or your comment to. And while waiting for the first question, I think what we have seen from this feedback is that we actually have a wide variety of pathways or types of innovations by which the bioeconomy is transforming agriculture. Yeah? So it ranges from genome editing, a point strongly emphasized by Maha as having a big potential, to agroecological type of innovations. I think the Agricultural Systems for the Future group has actually emphasized that. We have looked at a variety of digital innovations, the microbiome, and I think there are also different visions of future agriculture associated with that. And I think it would be really interesting to learn more from you, from the audience, on where do you see the future, and also what are your messages for the plenary session. You can also just type into the chat what you believe would be main messages for the plenary session of this Global Bioeconomy Summit. I see that some colleagues here are actually typing questions.
Maybe while they're...
Kute, sorry?
I was going to say, while they're typing, maybe I could ask a question of the microbiome people. One of the disappointments was that I didn't get to go to any of your sessions, because I was quite intrigued by the potential of the microbiome to you know, in the soil health area and in some other areas. Did you guys do you see the microbiome in making a big contribution to agricultural productivity in the near future and to bioeconomy growth?
While Angela is joining us, let's just look at some questions in the chat. What are the challenges to measure the growth of the bioeconomy? I think that's a question probably for the BioMonitor group. Maybe Max or Justus, would you like to answer the experience in measuring the growth of the bioeconomy? We have a question here to Ulrich, sure. From Moritz Koch. Moritz Koch asks, I guess it's a problem to transfer innovative ideas from academia to industry. At least in Germany, this is particularly difficult because I do not know about any funding sources for this crucial step in the innovation gap. For understandable reasons, industrial companies first want to see how can we scale up our innovations? How can we overcome that? So, Ulrich, if you have a chance to let us know, I think you mentioned how to get beyond the prototype. Yeah, I think this is what this refers to. What's your answer to Moritz?
So I'll try to answer that. Obviously, that's a general discussion, not only in agriculture, but in a broader sense. How can we transfer knowledge and innovation from science into the commercial sector? I think there are good examples for that, where it's actually working. So there is a in the breeding sector, I think we have very good interaction there. There is a lot of interaction going on. I think, and that's I think that was the last comment which I made in my report from the session. It requires a strong dialogue and a stronger dialogue between those who are providing opportunities, which are supposed to be scientists on the one hand, and those who are having a certain demand. Often there's a kind of two-side problem there. On the one hand, scientists may develop stuff which is not needed by those who have a demand. On the other hand, those who have a demand of innovation might not know what kind of solutions are there. So dialogue is very important. And from our own work, I think we really have to see there that the best thing to do is to have people on the ground. So we also discussed this in the group, in the breakout session, that working with farmers is very essential for scientists, that they know what farmers actually need. And that's not only in Germany, but that's also in the global south, because we we need to develop solutions for demands and not just some solutions which no one wants to have.
Okay, thank you, Ulrich, for sharing this.
There was, I think, the question about, what can do the microbiome for us or for the environment in the near future. So I think the microbiome can do really a lot, but probably not in the near future. It will work, of course. We will learn more and more, and there will be more and more innovations coming up. But microbiomes are everywhere. They play a key role in our ecosystem, and therefore, of course, we can also make use of microbiomes to prevent greenhouse gas emissions, to develop more sustainable practices, to protect better diversity, and all these kind of things.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing this, Angela. We have another question in the chat from Mirko to Carl. You just mentioned that unnecessary regulation can reduce incentives for innovation, but a lack of regulation can also lead to unwanted results, Mirko says. Thus, how do you see the role of enabling versus constraining governance for the bioeconomy? That is, what balance is needed between enabling new sustainable practices and restricting unsustainable practices? Over to you, Carl.
It's always a balancing act. There's no doubt about it. I mean, in the first instance, you have to rely on the best science that's available, and of course, in our contentious economy these days, science is nobody believes science anymore either. So we can't, everything is a big argument, or at least it seems like it. So I think that regulators need to rely on science to the extent possible, and we talked a little bit about it in our group that the scientists need to learn to communicate better with the lawyers that make these regulations and with the politicians that make the regulations, and then the scientists also and lawyers also have to be effective in communicating with the public, and so that the science gets out there, and then the public and the policymakers can make their decisions based on that. That doesn't really solve the question entirely, because there's always going to be different political interest groups and economic interest groups that are going to be pushing in these different directions. So there isn't any one solution to how you do these things. You have to have participation, as well as people really trying to communicate effectively. Kind of a wishy-washy answer, I'm sorry, but that's I think that's the best I can do.
We do have a related question in the chat. Tobias is asking, talking about microbiomes and genetic modification of plants to transform agriculture, how can we convince the society to understand the GMOs, either plants or microorganisms, to use them today in agriculture? How can we convince them? How to convince society that this contribute to a more sustainable economy? And then we have Mareike saying, as a reference to Tobias Schwarzmüller's question, convincing society is very nice, but there are some issues with global warming. How to overcome this? We need to have action immediately to stop global warming. The presented new strategies seem nice, but I think there is a lot to convince society to be an active part. Yeah, maybe someone, whoever would like to answer, maybe someone from the group on the transformation, maybe Philip. I think the transformation of agriculture, what does it take? I think that is really maybe relevant here. Philip, would you like to comment?
This is a great question, I think. So one of the last aspects we also discussed in our last session for this plan here is the importance of co-creation spaces and living labs where people, where scientists citizens and basically all stakeholders come together to work on innovations that in the end also have to be accepted by society. Because, I mean, I think we have probably seen this during this whole workshop. There are many innovations that we also work on that in the end is questionable if we achieve something like a societal acceptance of these innovations. So we talk about extracting nutrients from wastewater, or if we talk about virtual herding. So it's really important to have these living labs, co-creation spaces, and so on. And really, this is something also fun. It should focus on much more when they make calls. That these approaches should be an absolutely integral part of research in the future. So I think this could be a way of achieving acceptance on the one hand, but also making the society aware of the problems we face and getting the society on our side. So yeah, so this I think is very important.
All right, thank you very much, Philip. I think we have another interesting contribution here. So here we say the link between microbiomes. This is from Jennifer Kensior. She says a link between microbiomes, soil health, and greenhouse gas emissions. So here we bring it all together. Was one of the subjects addressed in the FAO Microbiome Network in July 2020. We also look at interconnections between different ecosystems, opportunities, and risks using microbiome in sustainable and circular bioeconomy, and from other subjects with input from experts from different parts of the world that are then listed. And if you're interested in joining that, then please write to Carol FAO. I think you see it in the chat. So you're welcome to join the network. And Tobias is actually also asking, how do you implement action immediately without society? Look at all these QAnon, fake news believers, and others. Yeah, I think that is really very important, how to bring the voice of science into these debates. And then George Miranda is asking, are there different types of beneficial microbes for the improvement of agriculture? Maybe we take this as the last question, and then we could make a quick trial of whether we can actually vote on some questions that have been discussed here. So maybe just a quick answer on these different types of beneficial microbiomes that you would highlight based on your discussion. Maybe Angela would like to say a few words.
It's a challenging question because microbiomes are complex. Of course, there are many different types of microorganisms or microbial communities which have very beneficial functions. So, for instance, I mostly work with plants and soils, and there, for instance, there are many microorganisms which, which deliver nutrients to the plant, to mobilize nutrients or via nitrogen fixation or just mobilization. Other microorganisms, for instance, protect the plant against diseases. So they can, for instance, directly antagonize pathogens. They can outcompete pathogens. They can also elicit in the plant a systemic response which makes them stronger, a kind of immunization. Also, for instance, microorganisms can make plants stronger in terms of that they can better cope with different types of stress, so that they can better cope with water stress or with drought or with heavy metals or other difficult and challenging conditions. Of course, they also play an important role in all nutrient cycles in the soil. So, of course, when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, to have the right balance and the appropriate activities, it's very important to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If we think about, for instance, NOx derived from soils and so forth. Or when it comes to methane, this is of course also a very important cycle So of course we have the balance between methanotrophic, so methane producing and methane consuming microorganisms, and we need of course here the right balance between these type of communities to avoid methane emissions. So the list is long. I think there are many more examples, but I just wanted to highlight some of them. I hope I could answer the question.
Okay, thank you so much, Angela. So this is, I think, related to some issues we have discussed. So you have the option to vote A, B, or C. Yeah. So what's the future role of genome editing? Was highlighted very much, for example, by Maha here. Do you say it will be widely used and transform agriculture throughout the entire? Would you say it will be widely used in some parts of the world and not in others, as it is the case with genetically modified crops today that are used in the Americas, for example, Western Europe? Or do you feel generally that other innovations, such as in the field of agroecology, will prove to be more important worldwide in the bioeconomy? And if it works now, I can actually ask this survey, and now you can actually vote for A, B, or C, and then we can get a general picture of that. So please just vote so we can see how you actually perceive those issues. Okay. I think you see it on the screen here. So 20% or 11 have voted for A, that it actually will be widely used throughout the world. 56% of you believe that it will be used in some parts of the world, and 24% of you believe that other innovations will actually prove more important worldwide. So I think that's an interesting balanced view about it. Then let's vote on another issue. So here the voting is with the microbiome innovations. I tried to capture what was reported, what Tanya kindly reported here. So in your view, what is the most important strategy to promote the adoption of microbiome innovations in agriculture? Yeah, so one outcome of the workshop was we need a more holistic approach. We need to look at different aspects, how microbiomes influence each other. Other outcome was that there's a need to manage the regulations in different regions of the world better. They're influenced on earlier technologies. Another outcome was that we need to manage expectations, appreciate the long-term perspective of that, or create linkages. So which of these would you think is actually most important? And again, let's do a survey on that. So you can vote A, B, C, or D. Yeah, so please, with regard to what you heard from our microbiome colleagues, what do you think might be most important to promote those innovations from all these issues that were actually discussed? Most have voted now. So let's see what came out of this voting. So the majority of you think that it's really the dialogue, creating linkages between scientists, stakeholders, and policymakers is very important. Second most important, the holistic approach, followed by managing expectations. Regulations are not seen as a major issue in the microbiome. I think that's also a very interesting result. And then just one last voting slide for our session here on the digital revolution discussed specifically in section 1. And I also tried to capture what was actually presented here by Ulrich. So in your view, what is the most important strategy to promote the adoption of digital innovations in agriculture? Is it overcoming the gap between academia and practice, this issue of getting beyond the prototype? It was also reported that is it necessary to work on a wider variety of crops, not just the major crops with these digital innovations, or use technological digital solutions and along the entire value chain, not just in primary production, or similar to the microbiome, is it increased dialogue among stakeholders? So let's do a final voting on these 4 options on the digital revolution before I hand over to Carl to say, as president of the ACABR, to say a few final words. Okay, we are still voting. Let's see what comes out of this vote. So indeed, 38%, so the largest, believes that this gap between academia and practice is really important, followed by those who think there's a dialogue. Here comes in here second, technological solutions along the entire value chain, and the least is the work on a wider variety of crops. Okay, so I would like to thank all of you for participating in this survey. We will certainly weave it into our reporting back to the plenary session. And it was really fascinating for me to organize this workshop together with our colleagues from the 4 organizations. And now I would like to hand over to Carl Prey, President of the ACABR, to give a final word of thanks to the participants. Over to you, Carl.
First, I'm thanking Regina for all the work she did getting this all organized. As you may know, we had put in our own proposal, and then suddenly we were given the role of collaborating with 4 or 5 other proposals, and Regina did the bulk of the work in trying to get this to all happen, and it did happen, and much to my surprise, in fact, considering the complications we had last week. So thanks very much for participating, and what I want to actually just finally say is that I want to make a little advertisement for ICABR, and you can find out what that's all about at icabr.net. And basically, we have a annual conference, and this is going to be the 25th annual conference coming up in Italy next year and online. Hopefully, we have some part of it that's in Italy, although certainly we're not too hopeful at the moment. But we're going to have the meeting in Italy and online, and the title is "The Role of the Bioeconomy in Generating Resilience and Sustainable Development." And these meetings are meetings of social scientists, biologists, policymakers, discussing science and technology policy issues related to the bioeconomy, which is why it fits in so nicely, we think, with what most of you folks are interested in. And we invite you to come to the meeting next year, either virtually or in person, and hope that you can join us. And we're looking forward to the rest of this workshop and seeing what what other ideas people are coming up with, and what some of the leaders in science and policy are going to be doing. So thanks again to everybody who participated. Thanks to the technical staff of GBS. And it was a good session, I thought, at least the 2 sessions that I was able to participate in. So I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you all, and have a good evening, and hope to see you tomorrow at the plenary session of this Global Bioeconomy Summit 2020. Bye-bye.
Bye.